Hey everybody, this is Dr. Flight. I hope you're doing great today. It's nice to touch base with you. This video is on a topic called organizational resources, which is has a long history since the 1990s, early 1990s actually, in marketing, and it is one of the ideas in marketing is we like to focus on how firms compete against each other. And oftentimes when we look at the marketplace, we understand that we do a market analysis and we want to know as much as we can about the consumers and kind of what they want and how we're positioned towards them. But it has to always be looked at through the lens of the competitive landscape. And so competition and strategy thereof have always been a really big part of marketing activities and part of the planning process and the things that we do. So one of those key concepts then is this idea of what strengths a firm has, how they can leverage those strengths, and then compete, in a market-based space. So organizational resources then has again a long history, and we talked about this through the lens, if you will, of strategic fit. That's where the base of this conversation happens. And when we talk about a strategic fit, we talk about this idea of matching a company's internal strengths or abilities with external opportunities. And you'll remember back, and we'll circle back around to the SWOT analysis, but the S stands for strengths and O in SWOT stands for opportunities. So when there are opportunities that present themselves in the marketplace or in a number of other ways, we want to be prepared with the right resources or strengths to be able to take advantage of that. So that's what we kind of think about when we talk about our perspective of competition when it comes to firm resources. And this would differ again a little bit from our friends in management who also focus heavily on this as well. But where we come down on this is we want to evaluate our internal strengths and then modify them by strengthening them, increasing them, obtaining them in somehow in order to adapt to those opportunities and threats that lie outside of our view. And this is very much when we look at the opportunities and threats, it's very much drawn from having a operational perspective of both the market, again, a customer view, and a competitive view, which are key components of what we call market orientation, that model that we looked at a while back. So this is really a reflection of that, and another sort of image, if you will, or this resource framework deals with having a resource-based view of the firm. In other words, evaluating the resources we have, which then match what the market is looking for. And so when we think about the strengths we have, looking at the market orientation concept again, externally evaluating competitors and customers in order to make business decisions, that fuels this notion that, well, if the market or our competitors are presenting these opportunities, we want to be prepared with the resources that are going to allow us to take advantage of that. And so that's what this talk is really all about. It's this idea of resources and how they're defined and what they look like within the organization in order to leverage them to make a sustainable competitive advantage. And it all focuses on gaining that competitive position, which you'll see in the middle of your screen. So we talk about these topics kind of all together: resources, skills, competitive advantages, and things like that. But from a marketing perspective, again, the literature is rich on this for now well over 30 years. There's been a lot of literature and a lot of studies that are done on this. And at the end of the day, the idea here is that if you take an organization and you put together all of its different pieces, you have different strengths or skills that get bundled together. Now, each bundle is unique and different, but you have things like human capital, you have employees, you have technologies, you got patents, you got laboratories, you got relational elements, you've got distribution channels, and all of these things come together to form the organization, but they do so uniquely. And this is the crux of the theory that when companies or organizations bundle their resources uniquely, that's where competitive advantage or that's where competition forms, because each firm is a little different. They differentiate themselves from each other based on these bundles. So that's kind of kind of the nexus, that kind of where we all go with this. Now, these different resources or strengths that we talk about, there are many different types. Some are strictly marketing related, but others are operational in that sense. And they create this competitive distinctiveness that your firm will have. There's also a term that's really worth knowing, that may be new to you, and it's something called isolating mechanisms. So an isolating mechanism is when one of these strengths that you have protects you or isolates you or insulates you, is a good way to think of it too, from your competitors, and it creates a barrier of competitive advantage. So in other words, if I have a strength that no one else can copy, if I have, like, for instance, a patent on a new product or technology, then I'm protected. It creates what's called an isolating mechanism. It is an isolating mechanism that protects me or insulates me from my competitors, and I'm able to leverage that or use that to form a competitive advantage where they're not able to. And that's really one of these things we're talking about. We're talking about these skills that really set us apart, but also ones that allow us to be leveraged in the marketplace to gain market share, gain sales, gain price premiums, and all the other good things that we like to think about. Okay, so remember that term. We'll come back to it a little bit, and we'll think a little bit more about how those are created and what they are. So, in a big sense, kind of again, extending this framework, there's really three sort of stages, if you will, or three areas of understanding that we'll walk through in this video. And then we'll apply this through the SWOT analysis model, just to give you a little more, a little bit of a different perspective of resources and how they can be used. So number one, and again, we're going to go through these in a little bit more detail, but one is just understanding and knowing what resource-based view of the firm is, what that theory is, and what it surrounds. And then label number two is the assessment of and the acquisition of dynamic capabilities, marketing assets, and dynamic marketing capabilities. So we've got kind of a few things that we're going to look at together as a whole. And then finally, once you have a set of skills or bundles you've identified, or capabilities that you've identified, thinking of those, sort of leveraging those and using those as a collection, as a group, which would be a portfolio. Okay, so let's just sit back and let's just talk a little bit about resource-based theory of the firm. So our RBT or RBV, resource-based theory or resource-based view of the firm, emanated again in the 1990s by a paper in 1991 by Barney, and it has been extended several times to also include a topic called resource advantage theory, or RA theory. And this is that theory that really states that firms are bundles or groups or sets of resources, and each of those sets is created uniquely. And we manage those to take advantage of our competitors and to gain advantages wherever we are. So firms within the same industry then compete based on how their bundles are distinct. Importantly, some bundles function better than others. In fact, those that have or are able to create those things called isolating mechanisms. So an example is maybe we have two shoe companies. We have Nike and Adidas. And let's just say, for argument's sake, maybe this isn't a good example, but maybe Nike has a real strong distribution network and they have real strong relationships with their retailers so that they can bring their products to market in a very, very, very efficient and effective way. And maybe Adidas or the competitor maybe doesn't have that network established. And so that network then is a skill or a resource that Nike can then tap into and leverage that to create market-based advantages. So that's the idea when we start thinking about this. But resource advantage theory goes a little bit further. We also kind of think about what is a resource, like how would you define it, like what makes a resource, and then finally, where do resources come from? So again, from Barney's work and others, there's a kind of a framework called VRIN or VRIO, or you can combine the I and the N. So I know that's confusing, but the V stands for valuable. And these are characteristics of a resource. So if a resource has these things I'm talking about, then it will be considered something that the company can leverage and perhaps turn into an isolating mechanism. If it's valuable, what it means is the asset or the resource creates value for the customer or creates efficiency and lowers costs for the firm. And also the resource is not free. It comes at some cost to the company in order to be able to use it. So that's one example. That's thing. It has a cost or it has value. Consider a coffee shop that has a real specialized coffee maker that creates coffee, grinds the coffee. It's like a super duper espresso machine or something like that. Well, it adds value to the customer because it creates really good high quality product, and it could be cost effective to run and so on and so forth. But it adds value. It came at a cost. There was an expense that the firm absorbed in order to acquire that super duper espresso making coffee machine. That's value. That's how it's valuable. But now this can't be something that everybody has. This is one of the challenges. So it can't be simply a machine. It has to be a machine that your competitors are unable to also acquire. So I have this, I'm running the shop and I have this super duper machine. Maybe this machine came from Italy and maybe it came straight from a coffee espresso maker machine company in Italy and I have the only one around. That would make it very rare, right? It would make it hard to find. It's not something that the competitors can just run out and get on their own. It has to be something that is unique. Okay, so that's the second thing. The I and the N, sometimes these are combined, and that's why there's a sort of a slash there. Just the theory has shifted a little over time. I means imperfectly imitable. So in other words, it's something that can't be copied. And very closely related to that, the N means it's non-substitutable. So in other words, you can't take something else and replace it easily. So it can't be copied. The other companies, they can't reverse engineer. The other coffee shops, maybe they can't create their own version of this machine because it's so specialized and it's so unique. It has proprietary inner workings, and so they can't duplicate that. in a machine of their own, or if they wanted to try to fabricate one of their own, it would be difficult or impossible for them to do it. So it can't be copied, and they can't simply take another machine and do the same things with it. So in other words, they don't have the exact machine, they have a different machine or a different process. And what non-substitutable means is I can't simply use another resource and get the same effects as I would had I had the primary resource I'm focused on. So they can't just copy it, and they can't use another machine to duplicate the type of work that's there. So again, very closely similar to each other, the I and the O. And then finally, the last one, and again, this item was added over time. It stands for organized. The O is organized, and this is the wording doesn't flow quite as well, but basically what it means is that the firm is set up to take advantage of that resource. So I have this espresso maker that's unique, it's world class, it's a one of a kind, nobody else has it. Other machines will not do what this one does, so it can't be copied or substituted for. It was expensive, but it creates great products, so it creates value. Um, but we also know how to run it. We understand how to run it. We have the right beans that go into it, so our supplier is correct. We have parts so that if it breaks down, we're able to fix it. Our employees know how to utilize that resource, that machine, in order for it to deliver the value that's created. So in other words, the infrastructure in the organization is set up so that it will take advantage of that resource. Okay, that's that fourth thing. Now, and again, here's just kind of a visual that this is based off of. If you can sit here and you can look at this a little bit. Again, you can add that N in the I area if you want. But here's the challenge. Very, very, very few resources exist that that have all four of these things. They're very, very rare. And so if your company has one or two, you can truly leverage those to set yourself apart from your competitors. It's your distinctive advantage. It's what you base your sales on, and your bringing people in the shop, and your advertising is kind of what you sell as why people should buy your product, because of the benefits that are received as a result of this particular thing. So it's a very high standard. Meeting all four of these criteria are really challenging. Meeting the first one or maybe the second one are pretty easy, but adding them all four together, it's a real big challenge. So that's why the bar is set high for these. But if you achieve this, if you have something that reaches this threshold, it'll absolutely be an isolating mechanism. It will protect you or insulate you from competitors, at least in one area of your business. Okay, so this is the idea. This constitutes what we would define as a resource that can be leveraged into a sustainable competitive advantage. And the list can be fairly extensive in terms of where these resources might come from. Again, they could be marketing resources. They could be tangible resources. They could be intangible. So marketing resources might be things like good customer relationships, a CRM program, maybe advanced usages of AI to do journey mapping and some things like that. Could be the sales force that you have on the floor selling the product. Tangible ones could be business, the building itself or factories, things like that. There are all kinds that really come from. So traditionally speaking, you can kind of take a look at these lists that we have here. Traditionally, there are 6 different areas from, again, older literature that say that resources sort of emanate from. And one would be physical, like factories, inventories, equipment, things like that, raw materials. Again, they have to meet the 4 criteria in order for these to to be. So they just might come from these areas, but they have to meet those criteria. Capital, financial assets, access to credit markets and banks and financing and things like that. That could be an area that it comes from. Absolutely, big area would be legal resources, patents, as I mentioned, trademarks, contracts that have. Those could be things that you use. And then others include organizational structure, like routines, culture, things like that. Those are more intangible, of course. Informational skills, like gathering information, using it, things like being able to convert big data into AI, with AI algorithms, into some type of um, advantage with the customer, things like able to use data. And then finally, relational. So we talk about customer relationship, but what about B2B or business relationships? Relationships you have with suppliers uh, and distributors and retailers, and relationship you have with the government and regulatory agencies. Those are all sources of distinction that you might be able to set yourself apart from. So this is like resource-based view of the firm incorporates this idea of bundles of skills set companies apart from each other. They are You're able to create what's called an isolating mechanism from one that's really from a resource that meets the VRINO framework. So those have to be checked to be able to confirm that your resource is leverageable to earn a sustainable competitive advantage. And then we understand that they come from many different areas. So those are the three big things to take away when we think about resource-based view of the firm. And those are things you should know if you really kind of are comfortable with this material. But that brings us up to this. So that's number one. And so this brings us up to some other thoughts or ideas. The three, kind of stages here, they all kind of go together. Dynamic marketing capabilities. This is when you are able to do marketing functionally, and but be nimble enough to be able to change and adapt from a marketing function perspective when we do marketing. Marketing capabilities, again, processes that we do with marketing that help create competitive advantages. And then finally, assets. And the assets are going to be sort of this list of resources that you have available to you that create the bundle. So just kind of thinking about these a little bit, dynamic marketing capabilities has been defined as the capacity of an organization to purposefully create or extend or modify its resource base. Okay, so this is really critical as you see shifts and changes take place either in the market or the industry. Inevitably you're going to have to adapt and change what you're good at and what your skill set is in. And so being able to do that means you can dynamically, so you can change then what your resource base is to reflect those opportunities and threats that come from changing markets and changing industries. There are three basic types of, or kind of dimensions of this. There's absorptive capacity or capabilities to be able to learn and sense what's going on. Adaptive capabilities, being able to, again, shift and change, to reflect that. So the seeing the change, the adapting to the change, and then innovating. So creating new. So new processes, not just like there's not just a new technique happening in the industry, we should go along with it, but being the leader, the innovator, or the change agent, I guess, doing something for the first time in your industry is incredibly risky, but it's one of these traits of being dynamic. So being flexible and nimble enough to change, that's the idea of kind of this dynamic nature of resource evaluation, changing your resources nimbly and quickly enough to, and creating new resources that will help you manage the turbulence of a potential market. Okay, number two, marketing capabilities. Okay, and this is this idea of do you have resources that are embedded into the marketing processes, and in particular, I'm just going to call out the four P's, right? When you do pricing, what types of skills do you have in price setting? What type of skills do you have in product development, innovation? What kind of skills do you have when you're communicating, when you're creating messaging appeals and things like that? Distribution. So again, we do the marketing function. We do the four P's. We manage. We use strategy. We do planning. We do execution of our plans that surround themselves with the four P's, and consider the resources that could be in there. And also don't forget branding, brand equity, creating the image of the brand. That's enormously big, and it can be enormously huge in terms of a form of resource that can set you apart. Okay, so that's the second part. And then the third part is just simply this idea of where are these assets? So that's why I kind of put these three things together in step number two. They go together. The being dynamic and being able to change your resources, being able to apply them to marketing functions, and then being able to account for them, and specifically in the marketing space. So these are marketing assets. There could be other assets that we list, other resources that aren't as market focused, but customer based assets, relationships with customers, company name, your reputation, your brand, market domination. Supply chain deals primarily with the relationship you have with upstream and downstream business partners. Access to markets, management skills, technologies, other things like your CRM system, copyrights and patents. Again, this falls in that legal space, franchises, licenses, those types of things as well. These all are potential resources if you do them well enough, and if they meet the VRIO and NO framework, then they could be isolating mechanisms that help you set yourself squarely apart from everybody else. Okay, so that's kind of that middle section, if you will. Jump into the third section of the framework. We talk about the resource portfolio. And highlighted here is a 2x2 sort of summary, I guess. And so you're gonna have a bunch of resources, and we can characterize them by how important this resource is to the customer or creating value in the marketplace. And then we can also summarize them by how well we do them compared to our competitors. So remember, I gave you that Nike example, and their distribution channel was important. So the key is it important to the customer in creating value for them, and how good are you at it compared to your competitors? If they're superior, then they're going to fall to either be a crown jewel. That distribution will either be a crown jewel or a black hole for the company. But if they're good at it, and they and the customers gain value, or they see it as an important thing. So for instance, when you go to a store, you don't want to have to go to one location to find a pair of Nikes. Maybe you want 7 or 8 different locations you could choose from. And if the distribution system allows for that, then that would add value to the customer. The customer would be then getting something that they want, And then that makes it a crown jewel. That makes it something that's well worth investing in as a resource, and then leveraging also from a market-based, kind of advantage piece. So the crown jewels, then, these are very often you could call these your isolating mechanisms, because they're things that most likely meet the VRI NO framework, those criteria, but also it's something that the customer wants. So that's a good. So that's so distinct. This is going to, maintaining a crown jewel will set you apart for a very, very long time. Black holes are a little bit of a different scenario, or in terms of the type of resource. It tends to be a resource or a skill the company has had and invested money in, but for some reason, the market doesn't gain value in that anymore. Maybe it's an antiquated piece of machinery or something that you've had, that you've used in the past, that gave value to the customer in the past, but no longer gives that value, and you still hold it, mainly because you've already got a lot of sunk cost into it. You've invested into that machine. The machine worked for you. It was something that you used to gain a competitive advantage years ago, but now it no longer does give you that competitive advantage, yet you're still locked into it. You are oftentimes required maybe still to use it. It still has value, because you put money into it, and some stuff like that. So it's on your books from an accounting perspective, but it's not delivering you a sustainable competitive advantage. It's not. It maybe once was an isolating mechanism, but today it no longer is. The Achilles heel, is one of these where the competitors very likely have this. It's something that you don't have. You're not relatively strong in this kind of resource, but the customers gain value from it. And so if the competitors have this, it could very well be their crown jewel, but for you, it's like it's a weakness because they have this and you don't, and the customers want it, right? So again, I'm the other coffee shop, and I look over and I see that my competitor has this new fancy espresso machine from Italy that creates incredible coffee, and no matter how hard I try, I can't duplicate it and I can't copy it. And the customer clearly gains value, sees value in that, and it's my competitor's strength, not my strength. And so this is thing like it's going to bother me because I can't emulate that, I can't copy that, I can't achieve that at this point in time. But the customers want it, and my competitors are using that against me, if you will, right? Then the sleeper resources, those are resources where um, they might be resources that have gone by the wayside, whereby we're not particularly strong in them, but the customer doesn't really gain value by having those. And so it's something that might develop into something later on down the road, but as of today, it's nothing. So it's kind of a boring category, if you will, but you can kind of look up and get more information on that if you want. So this turns our topic, though, and we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I want to do a little application with the SWOT model, because a lot of people are familiar with SWOT, and sometimes people don't really apply a strategy with the SWOT analysis. They do the SWOT analysis, they identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then it's just kind of that's it. It's like descriptive. The problem with that is a good managerial model is going to be prescriptive. It'll tell you what to do as a result of filling in the boxes. And so if you don't get something like a strategy out of it, then the exercise is largely wasted. So again, kind of looking at this, when we look at these strengths, these are our resources in this resource advantage sort of space. And there are all kinds of issues that you can sort of think of in each of these four spaces. You can pause this and you can kind of take a look at when we look at strengths, weaknesses, the SWOT, each one of these areas, it gives you pause for thought. So again, when we talk about strengths, we just talked about all these resources. The resource-based view of the firm is the strength category. Weaknesses would be the lack of resources, typically. So if you looked at resources that were valuable to the customer, but ones we did not do particularly well in, those Achilles heels, those would be weaknesses. And then we have other areas that deal with the other categories, of course, opportunities and threats. And when we look at those, really think about the evolving, shifting change in the market, and being able to adapt to those. So matching your resources to market and competitor changes is kind of the kind of the key thing there. So our strategic focus then, after we kind of fill in the four boxes, is to apply some type of strategy. So leveraging resources then to form a competitive advantage is what we want to be able to do. We clearly want to, capitalize on our resources, but simultaneously try to minimize weaknesses that matter to the customer. So again, if we're weak in a resource and it doesn't matter to the customer, then it's going to be one of those sleepers. It's okay. But if it matters to the customer, then it's going to be, probably an Achilles heel, right? If we're weak in that resource. So kind of think about that terminology and how it would apply here. And then consider how we're going to move forward. So I don't know if you've seen these strategies associated with SWOT before, but there's an aggressive, diversification, turnaround, and defensive type of a strategy. And we're going to look at this box, right? The matrix. So again, upper left, strengths. We have opportunities on the right, threats on the bottom right, and then weaknesses on the bottom left. So the internal stuff's on the left, the external stuff is on the right. The S and the W are on the left hand side. The O and the T are on the right hand side. And we want to match together strengths with opportunities. We want to minimize or avoid weaknesses and threats. So if there's a threat coming along and we're weak in that area, then that's a bad combination, right? And if we have a strength and there's an opportunity that you could leverage that makes sense, if they match, then that's when we want to be aggressive, right? We want to find an aggressive posture where we go out and we try to do um, a lot of innovation there. We want to push into that area. It's probably the best scenario that we're going to have. And we want to expand, we want to grow, develop new products. We want to be aggressive in how we approach that growth space. Again, we're matching strengths and opportunities, which is logical, right? That's a time when we want to be aggressive. If we have strengths, but there are threats that are there, that's when we can shift and change, and we can avoid threats by using our strengths in other areas. There's some examples here in particular of diversified companies that have this, and a great example is in the tobacco industry. Altria is a diversified tobacco holding company. So Philip Morris, U.S. Smokeless Tobacco, John Middleton, all these others, brands I've never heard of and brands I have, Philip Morris, of course. One of the ideas is to expand your portfolio in areas that are not threats. So tobacco industry, of course, is a really hard hit industry over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And the idea is if I have lots of financial strengths, lots of capacity and ability, but my industry is struggling, then I need to apply all those resources I have to another industry. And so you see the Philip Morris Capital Corporation, which is an investment company which is invested in aircrafts and power plants and real estate. So in other words, I'm diversifying my portfolio of investments, avoiding the riskier ones and adding more secure ones. And I guess it makes sense that, we see threats, so we take the resources we have and we find other opportunities to grow which are not related to the threat. And thereby we reduce the risk that we are, kind of seeing. Okay, so it's the application of your strength to something else. Okay, let's say that we have these weaknesses, but there are opportunities out there. The strategy is a turnaround strategy suggesting that we want to refocus our efforts, or as I put here, right the ship, get things back in order, and use the opportunities as a leveraging point to do that. You can reinvent yourself. You can recreate your brand. You can recreate your brand identity. Those types of things are what you want to kind of consider doing in that turnaround time period, and create a new you given the opportunities that are out there. Okay, and then finally, a defensive retreat type of a position is going to be held when we start looking at weaknesses, where threats is you want to kind of avoid, right? You want to avoid that. Maybe harvest or sell off businesses or products that you don't longer do well in and are susceptible to some type of external pressure. So we've got external things happening. Declining mall traffic has resulted in bankruptcies for many different companies. Think of Radio Shack, for instance. That's a great company. That Radio Shack used to be huge company, and through all kinds of perilous decisions, including foot traffic, but also just how they position themselves in a dying kind of space. They never reinvented themselves. They never recreated who they could be or were in order to overcome turbulence in the broader retail industry space. And so that has caused them problems there. Okay, so boy, this video has covered a lot. I know if you're still watching, then you're a real hero because you've made it to the very end. We covered resources, we covered all kinds of different topics relating to how to identify, how to measure, how to think about these isolating mechanisms, and then we applied some of that resource talk as the strength space in the SWOT analysis, and then considered from that perspective some SWOT strategies. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, and have a great day.